Well, good morning. Can you hear me? No? Yes? Yes, okay. My name is Penny Frese, and I'm delighted to be here in Houston with you this morning. You can't imagine how delighted I am to be here in Houston after a wonderful trip here yesterday. I wanted to tell you a little bit about how, well, first of all, let me find out who you guys are, right? Just so I know who I'm talking to. How many, I'm presuming that all of you are here because you are interested in schizophrenia. So how many of you are providers of schizophrenic services? Okay, good. How many of you are family members of somebody? Good. Consumers? Wonderful. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Who did I miss? Anybody? Okay. Yeah. Richard, I know who you are. So, delighted to be here and to be with you. My husband and I have been doing advocacy for a very long time. I met Fred when we were both grad students at Ohio University, and I was getting my degree. I have to give you a caveat here. I do have a PhD. It is in fine arts. Okay. That means I can say anything and not lose my license. So I'm going to be talking to you today from someone who lives with mental illness. I met Fred when we were graduate students, fell in love with Fred when we were graduate students, then I found out he had schizophrenia before we were married. And I knew that I had to marry him or I would die. So, and we would let the chips fall where they may. I knew nothing about mental health at that point in my life. And it was interesting when Linda asked me to speak about hope because, man, that's where we started. And I remember saying to Fred before we got married, let's talk about the hard things. Let's talk about the schizophrenia. And he said, oh, I think it's over. And both of us hoped that it was over. It was, of course, not over. But, and for me, this has been a 35-year journey, learning how to deal with this illness, understanding it, to recognize both the ups and the downs, the gifts that come with it. We also made a decision to have children because, I mean, Fred is a professional and we knew all the data, and there was a 13% chance that our children might have a mental illness, and we batted 100. We have 4 kids, they're all diagnosed, but not with schizophrenia so far. They began with major depression, and we have a daughter who has bipolar. And learning how to, fortunately for us, and I do say fortunately because I know that there are many people who have had it much more difficult than we, because we were in the field, because Fred was educated, because he educated me, because we knew people for all kinds of reasons. We had insurance. We have been able to maybe access the best that the system has to offer. And that was a huge blessing, huge blessing. Nevertheless, you still deal with a serious illness. So, when Joanne asked me to talk about hope, I thought this is a wonderful topic. Pray with me that this goes well because I don't usually talk about this. So, next slide. Yeah. This is Emily Dickinson's. Hope is the thing with feathers that perches in the soul and sings the tune without the words and never stops at all. Often we don't have words for our hope, but it keeps on singing. It keeps on singing in us. Sometimes we almost lose it, and then it comes back. So let's talk a little bit about hope. A lot of times we hear about false hope. Next slide, please. Yeah. I want to talk a little bit about what hope is not, okay? We can have false hope. Hope is not wishing. If hope was wishing, I would look like that girl there. Hope is not wishing. Next slide. And hope is not foolishness, right? It is not blind. It's not heading for disaster, okay? That's not hope either. Next. And hope is not fantasy, what we would like to dream about ourselves. That's not hope. That's just foolishness. Hope is the passion for the possible. For the possible. Doesn't happen right away, but it can happen. And it will happen. Right. Next slide. So how do we know what's possible? Well, it's possible if somebody else has done it. Right? I'm going to do this. All right? Would that be good? Okay. It's possible if somebody else has done it. One of the wonderful things in being with Fred and going through this whole process over many, many years. And Fred may tell you this, I don't know, but he tells about when he was first diagnosed, or in the early days, and he was hospitalized. And somebody came to him and said, really, it's kind of sad that you have to. And you could have done other things. But, you know, you have schizophrenia. And they told him he'd probably be in a state, this was before deinstitutionalization, he'd probably be in a state hospital for the rest of his life. And they said, although, you know, people do recover. And he said, who? Who recovers? And we couldn't say anybody. We couldn't say anybody. Fortunately, over the years, people have come forward. Fred just wrote an article last year, the year before, naming 10 people with PhDs who are functioning, who are heads of programs, who are working at universities, who are very proficient and doing their thing, and they have schizophrenia. It's not that they no longer have it. They do have it, but they are functioning. Right? They are learning, they are making contributions, they are living according to their abilities, and they are functioning with the disorder. In the early days, we couldn't talk about schizophrenia. We couldn't talk about mental illness. It was this huge secret. I had a friend across the street. We live in a very nice area between Cleveland and Akron, a beautiful little town, sort of a Norman Rockwell kind of town. And across the street from me was a lovely family. We used to call them Ken and Barbie. They were perfect people, perfect. She used to get upset if after a play date with her child, the mother did not send a thank you note. And I'm thinking, oh my God, I am just trying to stay afloat over here. And so Fred had a breakdown that was pretty serious, and he was off work for a month, or at least a month, maybe a little longer. And this woman from across the street, being very well-meaning, goes, Penny, I noticed that Fred's car is in the driveway. Is he all right? And I'm thinking, what do I say? What do I say? And I was exhausted. And I said, no, he had a breakdown. And she goes, oh, Craig's father has breakdowns. And I thought, Craig is her husband. And I thought, everybody knows somebody. Everybody. How many people live with this and live with it in silence? And we were carrying this burden in silence and isolation the whole time when everybody knows somebody. Fred says, I'm going to tell your stories, Fred, so I don't know what you're going to talk about tonight. Fred says that when he gets on a plane, he wants to be sure that people know they're sitting next to somebody who has schizophrenia. Because on a plane, they can't get off. There they are, they're stuck. And so often, when he says something about being a psychologist and also having schizophrenia, the people go, oh, my brother, my daughter, my son, and they want to talk about it. But there's nobody to talk to. Who do you talk to? Right? So it's possible to, if we know somebody has already done it, So here's this guy standing. All right, now, but that's not us. I'm not going to be climbing. I'm not going to be doing these things. So what's for me? What does schizophrenia and recovery look like for me? Next slide, yeah. Well, recovery is a profoundly personal experience. Very hard to define what it is for any person who has the disorder. I want to think a little bit about what recovery means, because so often, particularly as parents, we just want them to be normal. We want to go back to what it was being normal. I can remember saying to my friends when we finally were able to talk about schizophrenia, and I would go, yeah, Fred is schizophrenic. And they would all laugh, and I would go, no, he is. Usually, it doesn't mean very much. You get used to it, you deal with it, usually. But it always means something. There's always a little adjustment. There's always something in our lives that is around this schizophrenia. All right, next slide. When our daughter had her breakdown last summer, she had a bad one. And because she is an adult, we could do nothing to help her. Those of you who are parents know that terrible, helpless position to know that our loved one is sick and in need of help, and they can't ask for help, and we can't get them help. Awful, awful. So she was so sick. And as she began to recover, thank God, she went into terrible despair. And she said, my life is over. We've all been there. My life is over. I had all of these opportunities in my life. I had everything lined up perfectly. She had finished her graduate degree in nursing, had been accepted at Yale for a doctorate, totally free. It was going to be given to her. She was a midwife, going for an international fellowship, internship in Amsterdam. All gone, all gone. Her finances, all gone. Everything was gone. And she had kind of lost hope. I think very often when we confront these illnesses, we keep going back into our past, and what we are hoping for is a better past. We're not going to get it. We're not going to get a better past. So let's take a look at how do we cope with something like that. Next slide. What is it that we are recovering when we talk about recovery? What is it that we are recovering? Next slide. Our dreams, our health, our confidence, our sense of purpose, our motivation, our identity, our hope. What are we recovering when we talk about recovery? I'm going to show you this picture. This is our granddaughter, our only granddaughter. Looking at her mom. I like this picture because she's so homely. There she is, a couple months old. And we would throw ourselves into traffic for her, wouldn't we? People love children, and when we want to talk about our future and why we do things and a sense of purpose, we talk about for our children. Look at that little baby. Look at her look into her mother's eyes. Look at the confidence that is there. Look at the trust. What did that child do to deserve that? Not a single thing. She has no dreams. She has no hope. She has no identity. She has no confidence. She has nothing. She lies in her mother's arms and looks at her mom. What is it that makes us want to throw ourselves into traffic for this child. She did nothing but give her mother grief. That's all. It is because we know that we are not identified by our accomplishments, by our dreams, by some identity that we put on ourselves. We are identified by a spark of divinity that is in us. That's what we see there. That spark, we didn't earn it, but it was given to us. And that is what gives her life value. That is what makes her life a promise. I'm listening to a theologian and poet and philosopher named John of Donahue, Irish guy. And he talks about the immensity and luminosity of our spirits. And he said, so often we reduce our spirits to a little tiny thing that has something to do with a wound that we have. And we miss the whole other possibility, immensity that is us. Next slide. Who holds that child's dreams? Who holds the hope for that child? Sometimes we all must be the temporary custodian of somebody else's hope. Whether we are a parent and we're not trying to define our children's lives, we just know that they are worth it. And when my daughter said to me last summer, my life is over, I had to hold her hope for a while. We have to be the custodian. And we said, no, it's not. She says, how do you know that? And I said, I know it. I know it. In my heart, I know it. If we think of our lives and we're on a trajectory like this, and then this terrible thing happens and it's like we implode, we did not implode. We did not implode. The direction moved a little bit. That's all. The direction moved. Does it mean it's not worth it anymore, that it's less than we can be? Absolutely not. Next slide. Although we can be the custodian of somebody else's hope for a while, in the end, we are responsible for our own lives. In the end, I give that hope back to my daughter. In the end, I give that hope to my husband. People went, oh, you're in theater, you must have trained your husband, you listen. No, I have nothing to do with that. His life is his life. My life is my life. Our children's lives are their lives. They cannot give us responsibility, and we cannot take it. In the end, their lives are their lives. That's why Schizophrenia Anonymous, that's why SARTA exists, because people are responsible for their own lives. But the good news, keep that. The good news is that all that you are, all that you were before this horrible thing happened, you are. You are. Because everything that is important, everything that was given to you is still there. It's still there. The direction might have moved a little bit, but it's still there. All the promise, all the hope, all the goodness, that spark of divinity that is in you is still there. Okay. Now, I love this quote. Life is not a matter of holding good cards, it's a matter of playing a poor hand well. My mother used to say to me, I went to my mother, she had 9 kids, God bless her. And I was going to marry Fred. And I said, Mom, give me some advice. I want to marry a man who has schizophrenia. And she said, choose your poison. None of us gets out of this alive. Said, at least you know what your sorrow will be. We all are broken in some ways. We all have. I pity the person who feels they are not broken. You got a big surprise coming. We are all broken in some way, right? The idea is, how do we play our cards? How do we respond to that brokenness? Next slide. I love this. I have to read it from here. All right, this is Leo Biscaglia. The easiest thing to be in the world is you. The most difficult thing to be is what other people want you to be. We need to know who we are, to look at ourselves, and then to be ourselves, to be the gifts that were given to us. Not to accomplish somebody else's dreams, but to accomplish our own dreams. I think sometimes providers, and maybe even we as parents, we want people to be what is in our mind. We want them to be something that they don't want to be or can't be. We have to let them be who they are. Next slide. A lot of work has been done on resilience. There's a lot on the internet about it, and a lot of it is good. One of the, Linda, give me a sign when I'm running over, okay? Thank you. There is a woman named Ellie Werner, I think, who did a study, it's now in its 40th or 45th year, of children at risk on the island of Kauai. If you're going to do a study, you might as well be in Kauai. And she took children who had a number of factors against them. Poverty, parents who were alcoholics or drug users, and they were just low education and so forth. And there were 600 children born on the island of Kauai that year who were at risk. And she is still following those kids. Here's a very interesting fact. We seem as human beings to have a natural self-righting mechanism. Parents of teenagers keep this in mind, okay, because sometimes we need that hope. Of the kids who she was following, about a third of them did just fine. They went on, they got their schooling, they had successful lives, they married, and she has a number of criteria to say what makes a successful life. 2/3 of them, by the time they finished high school, were struggling. By the time they were in their 30s, half of those kids who had been struggling were okay. And now, in their 40s, all but a handful are okay. Right? There is a natural self-righting thing that we seem to have that parents need to know this. This is a good thing to know. Right? So when we look at how do we self-right, how do we bounce back from hardship, we call that resilience. Right? There are internal factors that help us, and there were external factors. The kids who did well from the beginning seemed to have a lot of these internal factors. One of them was they were really nice kids. They had a nice smile, they had a good sense of humor. People liked them, and because they liked them, they did things for them. So that's a big feature. All right, so central in this picture is a sense of purpose. If we have a sense of purpose in our life, and then these other things kind of branch out from there. We know ourselves. We're able to control our emotions or our behavior. We have good relationships. I can't read that top one. What is that? Oh, yeah, a positive realism, all right, that not those false hopes, but we're very realistic about who we are, right? And grit. Don't minimize grit. That's really important. The determination to do well. That's what got Fred through. Somebody told him, too bad, you were pretty smart. Too bad you have mental illness. And he said, well, I'm going to make it. Because he had the grit to do it. All right? So recovery then is marrying strengths. Here's the good news about this. If you don't have them, you can learn them. They're learnable. They're teachable. They're able to be developed with external factors. Next slide. All right. So it's marrying people's strengths with opportunities. Right. And this is from another series, so they don't always jive, all right? What kind of opportunities are we able to provide for people in order for them to use their strengths, right? And that's one of the keys to resilience, right? We need, and I put this over here on the side, some kind of stability in our lives. People who are living on the streets are going to have a much harder time moving from crisis to crisis. We need some kind of stability, right? Support. Family support is great. It is great. Even when they push us away, even when they say, we don't need you, I don't want you, you wrecked my life. Well, they have to blame somebody. They know we're going to come back. They know we're not in this job for the popularity. We will be there for them. So some kind of support and some kind of security. And then we provide, if we are able, educational opportunities, positive values. Oh my gosh, when people are in despair, they need our hope. They need our hope. We have to keep telling them, you are going to succeed. You are going to be all right. You can do this. Outlets for their talents and interests. People who may be very bright, but they want to put their interest into art. Well, they're not going to live, they're not going to become millionaires, right? If they put their interest into art, but if it allows them to express themselves, we're going to do it. When our middle daughter, Claire, was going to go to college, she had suffered a lot from high anxiety. And under stress, she did not do well, from the time she was a tiny little child, she did not do well. And then the question came, where will she go to college? She was a very bright girl, but she did not handle stress well. And initially we were thinking maybe she should go to a state school, someplace where she wouldn't be put under a lot of pressure. But that was really kind of unworthy of her potential. So we said, no, we're going to send her to a school, well, and she chose it, a school that was commensurate with her abilities. And then we would manage the illness. And we did. She did. She did. She advocated for herself. And the school cooperated with her. She had a medical single the whole time she was there. Sometimes she had to get special considerations. But she advocated for that, and she made it through the school, and she did very well. So we want to marry strengths with opportunities. Last slide. Read this to you. I don't know if you can read this. Hope moves us into the future. We don't stay in the past. We don't hang on to those things, those injuries and hurts and shortcomings that we have seen. We move into the future. It moves us into the future. Hope is like the sun, which as we journey towards it, casts the shadow of our burden behind us. It lends promise to the future and purpose to the past. My daughter said to me, this is Bridget, who can't be a midwife. She can't be a midwife. She wanted to be a midwife all her life. She can't do the diurnal things day and night and switching day and nights. It throws her into a breakdown. And she said, well, what do I do now? Do you know how many women are out there now deciding whether or not to have children because they have a mental illness? She has had a mental illness. She knows what it is like. And she is ministering to those people, those women. Right? It lends purpose to our past and direction to our future. And it turns discouragement to determination. One last story. I'm trying to write a book on Fred right now. So I'm getting into the early days before I knew him, of these early breakdowns. And one of the things that Fred had wanted in his life was to go into international business. And despite the backgrounds, he got a degree in international business. He was working with a business, an international company, and he had another breakdown. And he wasn't able to do it. So he took that little setback and he moved it over here. He was going to go into another kind of business. He had a psychological degree. He got more work in psychophysiology. And he was going to go into psychophysiology, particularly lie detection. And we had a wonderful offer. It was so exciting. This was from the federal government, which was setting up a lie detection center for the military. And they asked Fred if he would be willing to head it up. It was awesome. We were so excited. And then they did a security check. And they didn't even call him back. He met the guy who had been in discussion with him at a conference, and the man just totally ignored him. It was devastating, devastating. And I remember him thinking and thinking and thinking about it for days and days. And then he said, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to become the world's foremost authority on schizophrenia. I don't know if he is the world's foremost authority on schizophrenia, but he's here today. It just moves our lives in a new direction, but it doesn't make them less valuable. So it turns discouragement to determination. Leslie. I think this is Edison. Not sure. If you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. It all depends on our own response to the things that happen to us. Right? They are gifts. They are gifts. Everything in our life is a gift. Leslie. So make your mark. Isn't it a delicious thought that our best days have not yet been lived? There is so much hope out there, so much hope. We must carry that hope ourselves. We must bring it to others. And when we bring that hope, it is not enough just to hope. We use that hope to drive us forward to recovery. Thank you.